Okay, our Torah portion was Exodus 30, 11 through 38. And again, this is a 3.5-year cycle. In Yeshua's time, they did a double 3.5-year cycle that equaled the 7 years of release. So they were on that 7-year cycle, just like the year of release, and then the year of Jubilee after 7 sevens. So, Exodus 30, starting at verse 11. Who wants to read? No. What you said? Yeah. Brother, go ahead.
Adonai said to Moshe, when you take a census of the people of Israel and register them, each upon registration is to pay a ransom for his life to Adonai to avoid any breakout of plague among them during the time of the census. Everyone subject to the census is to pay an offering to Adonai half a shekel, 1/5 of an ounce of silver, by the standard of the sanctuary shekel. A shekel equals 20 gerdos. Everyone over 20 years of age who is subject to the census is to give this offering to Adonai. The rich is not to give more, or the poor less than the half shekel when giving Adonai's offering to atone for your lives. You are to take the atonement money from the people of Israel and use it for the service in the tent of meeting, so that it will be a reminder of the people of Israel before Adonai to atone for your lives.
Okay, that's good. So, we've got the half shekel, which was a temple tax, basically. And it was basically paid yearly. Who remembers the story of Yeshua paying the temple tax? Brandon?
I was talking about the disciples were talking to Yeshua about giving tribute.
Actually, there was somebody that came up and asked the disciples, does your master pay the temple tax, basically?
He got it from a fish's mouth.
Right.
That was it. He didn't actually have the money, but he told Peter, go out and catch a fish.
Right.
And the first fish that you catch, it'll have a coin in its mouth, and you go pay the tax for you and I. It was a shekel that was in the fish's mouth, and it was half shekel for Peter and half shekel for Yeshua. So he paid the temple tax. The Father provided it when he didn't have it, but that's exactly what that fish, the coin in his mouth, was all about. That was this temple tax it's talking about. Now, it's interesting because it says that it will make an atonement for you. This was an act of obedience that actually will make atonement.
Price of redemption.
Price of redemption, exactly. Now, it's interesting, it says that when we do that, that would be a memorial for the children of Israel before the Lord to make atonement for yourselves. It's something that's really special. It's an act of obedience that is really special to the Father. It's actually an act of memorial. It brings a memorial before Him to do this before Him. Now, who else remembers when there was mention of a memorial brought up before God? Anybody? I'll give you a clue. It's in Acts chapter 10. I'll read it real quick. It says, there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment, a devout man and one who feared God with all his household, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying unto him, Cornelius! And when he observed him, he was afraid and said, what is it, Lord? So he said to him, your prayers and your alms has come up for a memorial before God. Exactly like the half shekel. Now send men to Joppa and send for Simon, whose surname is Peter. He will be lodging at Simon the tanner's, whose house is by the sea, and he will tell you what you must do. So there is a special thing attached to giving of alms. This is above and beyond the tithe. The temple tax was not part of the tithe.
Right.
It was an offering that the people were to bring. And when they did it, it made atonement for their souls, it said. And it actually brought a memorial before the Father for them. So this is something that He didn't tell us how often we had to do it.
Right.
They were doing it basically on a year cycle in Yeshua's time because there was a blessing with it, and that's why they were doing it. So as we do this, we'll receive a special blessing. Now, it's specifically in our Haftorah portion, we'll see it was actually used to repair the temple, to keep the temple in good repair. So there was a purpose for it. But there's a special blessing when we actually obey. All right, who else wants to read now? Starting at verse 17. Scott?
So what? 41?
Yeah, that'll be good.
And the Lord said to Moses, make a large bronze wash basin with a bronze pestle and put it between the tabernacle and the altar, and fill it with water. And Aaron and his sons will wash their hands and their feet before they go into the tabernacle to appear before the Lord, and before they approach the altar to burn offerings to the Lord. They must always wash before ministering in these ways, or they will die. This is a permanent law for Aaron and his descendants to be kept from generation to generation.
Amen. Now this was specifically a command for Aaron and his sons, the officiating priests. Now, was Aaron's priesthood temporary or was it eternal?
That was eternal.
It was eternal.
He was a candle bearer? No. Yeah,
No, Aaron was the high priest. He actually was the one that would take the blood into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. He was the only one in all of Israel at his time that could go into the Holy of Holies. But he promised it to his children also. And in order to be a priest after the order of Aaron, you actually had to be in a direct line from Aaron or one of his sons. Now, Phinehas was his grandson, and Phinehas, if you remember, there was an Israelite man that took a Midianitish woman and went into the tent when God had forbidden the children of Israel to take wives of the pagans of the land, and he did it right in front of everybody. Phinehas rose up with righteous anger, went in there and stabbed them both through with a javelin.
Cosby, I think.
Cosby was her name, yeah. She was a princess of actually the Canaanites, I believe. Or was it the Midianite? Midianitish women. I think she was a Midianite. But she was a princess, and because of his zeal, because of upholding the Torah, God says, the priesthood will never depart from you. So Phinehas, that particular line, which I believe is where Zadok came through eventually, got an eternal priesthood. The second promise of this physical priesthood, which was patterned after the one in the heavenlies, the order of Melchizedek, which is also an eternal priesthood.
And it's also later on prophesied that he would cleanse the Levites and restore the priesthood during the millennial reign. And I'm sure that the reason he has to restore the priesthood, the Aaronic priesthood, was because of his promise to Zadok, Phinehas, and later Zadok, because he had promised them that they would always be priests from their line.
Yeah, and you can see that in the temple in Ezekiel chapter 40 to 44 mainly. But it's interesting, there's actually two different classes of Levites there. The sons of Zadok, who were faithful when King David went through his whole thing, and Zadok stayed with him. And then you've got the other Levites that ended up bowing to the pressure and following Adonijah or whatever else.
Of course, making reference to the brass laver and washing of the hands and stuff there, it says here in John 13:10, says, you should say to them, he who does wash needeth not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit, and ye are clean, but not all. I was talking
About Judas. Yeah. Yeah. So the washing the feet, when Yeshua stooped to wash the feet, that actually had to do with that representative of the cleansing. He also said in another place in John chapter 15 or 14, he says, now you are clean because of the words I've spoken. Washing in the water of the word. It's the spirit and truth. And that's the whole thing. There was a physical washing that the priests were required to do. And David talks about a man of clean hands and a pure heart. That's what it kind of represents, is you physically washing. And that's where the traditional washing in Judaism came from. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with it. But when the Pharisees started criticizing Yeshua's disciples because they didn't do it, that's when it became a problem, because it wasn't really commanded for anybody but Aaron and his sons. They had taken this additional holiness upon themselves and added this to the traditional Israelites, which you didn't have to do it. Nothing wrong with it, but you didn't have to do it.
Which Paul also made reference to in Corinthians, talking about the bride and all that the by the washing of the water, the word of the bride.
Yep, exactly. The words of Yeshua. We've heard about the Sermon on the Mount, the commandments of Christ. There's traditions in some teachings in some churches that the commandments we're supposed to keep now are just talking about the commandments of Christ. Well, that's really true if you want to get technical, because it was the angel that gave the lively oracles to Moses at the Mount Sinai. So that was Yeshua, the angel of the Lord back then, who gave the whole Torah, the commandments of Mashiach. So the whole thing basically are the commandments of the Mashiach. It's all good for us today.